The night that changed my life didn't begin with a funeral or a family argument. It began with a homeless man, shaking so badly he could barely hold a phone, whispering, "Ma'am, I found a blue box under your father's garage floor. But whatever you do, don't let your sister know." So why would my own sister be the one person I couldn't trust after our father had just died? My name is Tabitha Miller. I'm 28, and I work as a patient care coordinator at a small clinic in Billings, Montana, one of those jobs where you spend your days calming other people's emergencies while your own life quietly unravels in the background. And for the last year, I've been living inside a slow-moving nightmare that started the moment my father's heart gave out, and the people who shared my blood started treating his death like a business opportunity. I'm telling you this now because if you've ever lost someone you loved, you know grief isn't just sadness. Sometimes it's a door, and when it opens, you find out who's really standing on the other side. My father, Arthur Miller, wasn't a wealthy man, but he was steady, the kind of man who fixed things instead of replacing them. He owned a modest house on the outskirts of Billings, and an old garage behind it wide, drafty, and stubbornly standing after decades of harsh winters. To most people, it looked like a decaying structure, full of rusted tools and forgotten junk. To me, it looked like the last place my father still existed. That garage was his sanctuary. When I was a kid, if Dad had a bad day, he didn't slam doors or yell. He went out there. He'd turn on the dusty overhead bulb that flickered like it was tired of living, put on an old radio station that played classic country, and lose himself in the rhythm of work tightening bolts, sanding metal, rebuilding anything that had broken. He used to tell me, "People think a garage is where you hide clutter, but it's where you bring broken things back." After he died, those words stayed with me in a way I couldn't explain. The official story is simple. Dad passed unexpectedly after a short, brutal battle with a heart condition. In reality, it felt like a trapdoor opened beneath my feet. One month he was complaining about the snow and refusing to buy a new shovel, and the next month I was standing beside a hospital bed, listening to a monitor go quiet. Then came the paperwork, the estate, the arguments, and that's where everything turned ugly. Because my father's will was missing. Not misplaced. Not, "we'll find it eventually." Missing like someone had removed it on purpose. At first, I tried to believe it was an accident. Dad wasn't the type to keep things organized. He had systems, but his systems were usually piles of envelopes held down by random bolts and washers. Still, we searched anyway, every drawer, every folder, every shoebox. We checked the kitchen cabinets, the desk, the attic. We even went through the pockets of his old jackets hanging in the hallway closet, because Dad was the kind of man who could hide important documents behind a receipt from 2009. Nothing. Without a will, the property couldn't be sold or transferred until the court could make a ruling. That meant the house and garage were stuck in a legal freeze. But taxes didn't freeze. Repairs didn't freeze. Bills didn't freeze. And neither did my sister. My older sister Kendra always had a way of making grief feel like an inconvenience. She had perfect hair, perfect nails, and a voice that could cut glass when she didn't get her way. While I was still waking up at night expecting to hear Dad's footsteps in the hallway, Kendra was already talking about market value and liquidating assets. I remember the exact day it started. We'd barely returned from the cemetery. The air still smelled like damp earth, and my hands were still numb from holding a bouquet too tightly. Kendra cornered me in the kitchen like she'd been waiting for the right moment. "Tabitha," she said, "we need to be smart about this." I stared at her. "Smart? About Dad dying?" She rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. "I'm talking about the property, the house, that garage. We should sell it before it starts costing us more than it's worth." The garage. The place where Dad had built half my childhood with his hands. The place where his voice still seemed to echo if I stood there long enough. "You want to sell it already?" I asked. "It's not already," she snapped. "It's practical. You're the one being emotional." That word, emotional, became her favorite weapon. Anytime I hesitated, anytime I wanted to slow down and sort through Dad's things properly, she used it like a stamp to label me irrational. Over the next few weeks, her calls became constant. "You're wasting time. You're letting the place rot." Do you think Dad would want us drowning in property taxes? You're living there for free while I'm stuck waiting. I tried to keep my voice steady. I tried to be reasonable. I told her we couldn't sell anything until the court ruled. I told her I needed time to go through Dad's belongings, to preserve what mattered. But she didn't care about what mattered. She cared about what paid out. Eventually, I moved into the house, not because I wanted to, but because someone had to watch it. The neighborhood wasn't dangerous, but empty houses invite the wrong kind of curiosity. And the garage. The garage was a beacon for anyone who wanted to steal tools or scrap metal. Some nights, I'd stand in the yard looking at the garage doors and feel like a guard posted outside a tomb. The wood was warped, the lock was old, the roof leaked in places. But I couldn't bring myself to abandon it. Kendra would call, and I'd lie awake afterward, staring at the ceiling, wondering how someone could share my childhood and still feel nothing. Then, one afternoon after a particularly brutal phone conversation where she accused me of sabotaging her inheritance, I left the house just to breathe. I walked to the public park near the estate, the one with the tired swings and the cracked sidewalk. The autumn wind came sharp and mean, biting through my coat. That's when I saw him, an elderly man near a trash bin, digging quietly through discarded wrappers and paper bags. His clothes were ragged, his posture bent from cold and life, but something about him stopped me. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. He pulled out a half-eaten burger wrapper, then paused. From his pocket, he took a crumpled napkin and carefully wiped the rim of the trash bin clean. Like even in that moment, he refused to leave a mess behind. Dignity. That small, deliberate act hit me harder than any of Kendra's insults. I approached slowly, careful not to startle him. "Hi," I said softly. I don't want to offend you, but would you be interested in some work?" He looked up, eyes wary but gentle. "Work? I need help clearing out a garage," I explained. "It's big, there's heavy stuff, and it's cold. I can pay you. And if you need somewhere to sleep, there's a warm corner inside, just until you're back on your feet." He studied my face like he was searching for the lie. Then he nodded once. "My name is Elias," he said quietly. "Tabitha," I replied, and for the first time in weeks, my voice didn't sound like it was breaking. We walked back toward my father's property together, the wind pushing at our backs. I told him about the estate, about the missing will, about my sister. Elias listened without interrupting, like he knew what it was to be pushed out of your own life by people who thought they deserved more. But the moment we turned into the driveway, a sleek luxury SUV swung in so fast it spat gravel. The tires skidded, and the vehicle stopped like it was blocking us on purpose. My stomach dropped before the door even opened. Kendra stepped out immaculate, furious, heels sinking into the dirt like she didn't care where she stood. Her eyes darted from me to Elias, and her face twisted in open disgust. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," she hissed. She marched toward us, her voice rising. "Tabitha, have you lost your mind? Bringing this filth onto our property?" Elias flinched, taking a half step back, but he didn't run. He just stood there, shoulders squared, silent. I felt something snap inside me, not just anger, but a decision. I stepped between them. "He's here to help me," I said, keeping my voice firm. "I hired him." Kendra's laugh was sharp. "You hired a vagrant? While we're trying to sell?" "We're not selling," I shot back. "Not yet. And you don't get to decide who I hire while the estate is unresolved." Her eyes narrowed with pure hatred. For a split second, I saw something colder than greed, something calculating. "You're making a mistake," she said softly. Maybe I was. But as I looked at Elias, this stranger with tired eyes and quiet dignity, I realized something I didn't want to admit. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones most willing to ruin you. And I had no idea yet that the garage was already hiding a secret my father had buried. For my protection. A secret that would soon turn my sister's greed into something far more dangerous. And it all began with a blue box under the floorboards. The next morning, I carried a thermos of coffee and a paper bag of sandwiches out to the garage like I was bringing offerings to a place I didn't want to lose. The sun was out, but winter in Billings doesn't care about sunlight. Cold still crawls under your skin and settles in your bones. I kept my shoulders hunched against the wind, already rehearsing a dozen ways I could apologize to Elias if he'd had a miserable first night. I told myself not to expect too much. I'd only met him yesterday. He was older, sleeping in a drafty corner of a decaying garage with a thin blanket and the promise of cash. Most people would have walked away by sunrise. But when I reached the big wooden doors, I stopped so abruptly my breath caught. I heard it, a steady, rhythmic, mechanical humming sound low, confident, unmistakably alive. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, the way grief sometimes does. But the sound didn't fade. It grew clearer, like something was waking up. That hum belonged to my father's ancient Chevrolet pickup, the one that had been sitting on cinder blocks under a tarp for as long as I could remember, declared dead by everyone in the family. Mechanics had looked at it years ago, shook their heads, and called it a lost cause. Kendra used to joke that Dad should turn it into lawn art. I gripped the door handle, suddenly afraid of what I'd see, afraid of hoping. The door creaked open, and the smell hit me first. Oil, metal, dust, and faint warmth from a small space heater I'd left near the back. Then I saw Elias. He stood beside the Chevy with a rag in his hands, wiping grease off his fingers like this was the most normal thing in the world. The tarp had been pulled back neatly. Tools were laid out in a careful line on the workbench, and the truck, my father's dead truck, purred like it had never stopped breathing. I just stared. Elias glanced up, and a shy smile flickered across his face. "Morning, ma'am." "How?" My voice came out thin, almost childish. "How did you do that?" He shrugged, almost embarrassed by my shock. "It didn't need much. Carburetor was gummed up. Spark plugs were old. I found replacements in a drawer." He nodded toward the wall of shelves. "Your father kept good parts. He just ran out of time." That last sentence landed softly but hard, like a hand on my chest. He ran out of time. I swallowed, blinked too fast, and forced myself to move. I set the coffee down on the workbench. "You didn't have to do that," I managed. Elias looked at the truck like it was a friend he'd rescued. "I wanted to," he said simply. "Machines. They listen when you're patient." I poured coffee into 2 cups. We sat on overturned crates, eating sandwiches in the dim yellow light, the garage creaking and settling around us like it was waking from a long sleep. Outside, the wind scraped at the walls. But inside, for the first time since my father died, the place didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a heartbeat. I found myself talking more than I intended. Something about Elias's quiet presence made it hard to keep my emotions locked away. "My dad used to call this place his sanctuary," I said, staring at the grease-stained floor. "When the world got too loud, he came out here. When Mom left, he came out here even more." Elias didn't interrupt. He just listened, eyes drifting over the tools hanging on the wall with a kind of reverence I rarely saw in anyone, especially not Kendra. His gaze paused on a cracked leather glove pinned to a peg, on a set of wrenches arranged by size, on an old coffee can full of bolts. "He cared," Elias said quietly, as if he could read the story in the objects. "Not just about fixing things, about keeping them." I nodded, throat tightening. "Kendra doesn't understand that. She sees dollar signs." I laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "She keeps calling it junk. She says I'm wasting time and money holding on to rotting wood and rusted metal." Elias took another bite, chewing slowly. "Some people only value what they can carry away," he said. "They don't know how to value what stays." That sentence should have felt like comfort. Instead, it made me uneasy because it sounded like a warning. Kendra's words from yesterday echoed in my head, smooth and sharp. "You're making a mistake." I was about to respond when the sound of an engine outside snapped through the calm like a gunshot. A massive black truck barreled up the driveway and skidded to a stop so close to the garage doors, I felt the vibration through the floor. Gravel sprayed. Door slammed. My stomach dropped before I even saw who it was. Todd. My brother-in-law. The garage door swung open, letting in a gust of icy air and the stench of stale whiskey. Todd stumbled in like he owned the place. His face was flushed, his eyes glassy, his movements sloppy with anger and alcohol. He didn't even look at me at first. His gaze locked onto Elias like a predator spotting prey. Well, well, he drawled. So this is the trash you brought home. I stood up, my heart pounding. Todd, get out. He ignored me and kicked Elias's lunchbox across the floor. The metal clanged against the concrete, and the remaining food scattered into dust and old sawdust. Elias didn't flinch. He didn't rise to the insult. He just watched Todd the way you might watch a dangerous animal, calm, measured, alert. Todd lunged forward and grabbed Elias by the front of his worn jacket, hauling him up with surprising strength for someone who could barely stand straight. He shoved his face close, breath sour and hot. "Listen to me, you old rat," Todd hissed. "You've got one chance to leave this property. One. If I catch you here again, I'll burn this whole rat hole down with you inside it." My blood went cold. For a moment, I couldn't move. My brain ran through a dozen responses: call the police, scream, hit him, but fear glued my feet to the floor. Todd wasn't just loud, he was unpredictable. And I knew something else too. Kendra might pretend to disapprove, but she never stopped Todd when he acted on her behalf. Elias, however, did something I didn't expect. He calmly reached up and removed Todd's hands from his jacket, one finger at a time, firm but not aggressive. Then he straightened his collar slowly, like he refused to let Todd's touch define him. "I will leave when Miss Tabitha asks me to leave," Elias said, voice steady and strangely authoritative. "You don't have authority here." Todd blinked, thrown off by the lack of fear. Bullies depend on flinches. Elias gave him none. Todd muttered curses under his breath, spitting onto the floor as if he needed to mark the space with his contempt. He backed away, but before he turned, his eyes slid to me, cold and calculating. "This is your fault," he said, voice low. "When this place goes up, don't say you weren't warned." Then he stomped out, the truck roaring away a moment later, leaving the garage ringing with silence. I stood there, trembling, humiliation and rage burning in my chest. "Elias," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." Elias sat back down slowly, as if he didn't want the moment to own him. He picked up his lunchbox, brushed the dirt off the lid, and set it upright again. "Don't apologize for another man's cruelty," he said quietly. I swallowed hard. He threatened to burn the garage. Elias looked around the space, eyes flicking over the wooden beams, the old oil cans, the shelves of parts. "Then we should assume he means it," he said, "and we should be smart." Smart, practical, Kendra's favorite word. Except Elias didn't say it like greed. He said it like survival. Over the next few days, the atmosphere around the property changed. It was subtle at first, like the house itself had become aware of being watched. I noticed tire tracks near the driveway that weren't mine. Once, late at night, I thought I saw headlights pause at the end of the road before rolling away. Elias worked harder, almost relentlessly, as if keeping busy could keep danger away. He repaired weak floorboards, reinforced a sagging corner, organized shelves with the precision of someone trying to impose order on chaos. And in the quiet moments, the garage continued to feel warm in a way my house didn't. The house was full of echoes: my father's laugh, my mother's old footsteps, Kendra's angry voice. The garage felt present, alive, like it was still doing what my father had built it to do: hold together what the world tried to break. On the third afternoon after Todd's visit, I was in the kitchen sorting through my father's old mail junk letters, receipts, flyers when my phone rang. Unknown number. My heart kicked hard against my ribs, and I answered too quickly. "Hello?" For a second, all I heard was breathing fast, ragged, terrified. Then Elias's voice came through, shaken in a way I hadn't heard before. "Ma'am," he whispered, barely audible, "you need to come here right now." "What happened?" I demanded, already reaching for my coat. "I was fixing the rotting floorboards in the corner," he said, voice trembling. "The crowbar hit something hard, not wood, metal. There's something hidden under the boards, and," he swallowed audibly, "please, please don't let your sister know about this." My skin prickled all over. Something hidden, something metal, something my father buried beneath the floor. I didn't ask Elias what it was. I didn't waste time with questions, because deep down, I already felt it like the garage had been waiting for the right hands to lift the right board. "I'm coming," I said, voice tight. "Stay there. Don't touch anything else." Outside, snow started to fall again, thick, fast, blinding. The sky darkened, as if winter itself was leaning in to listen. I grabbed my keys and ran, because whatever Elias had found wasn't just a random object, it was a message. And somehow, I knew before I even started the engine that my father had left it there for a reason that could explain the missing will. A reason that could explain why Kendra was so desperate to sell before I had time to look. And a reason that might finally tell me what my father had been afraid of, long before the rest of us even noticed. The snowstorm came down so hard it felt like the world was trying to erase everything, including whatever secret was waiting for me under that garage floor. My headlights barely cut through the white curtain as I drove, hands locked around the steering wheel, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it over the engine. I didn't know what Elias had found, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: my father had hidden it for a reason. And if he had gone to that kind of effort, then whatever was in that box wasn't meant to be found by everyone. Especially not my sister. By the time I reached the property, the wind was howling like something alive. I parked my car slightly behind the house, instead of pulling straight into the driveway. I didn't know why, I just didn't want to be seen. The instinct felt irrational, but it was the same kind of instinct that tells you when something is wrong before you can explain it. Snow crunched under my boots as I hurried toward the garage, pulling my coat tighter around me. The cold bit into my cheeks, but I barely felt it. My mind was racing too fast. When I pushed the garage door open, the hinges groaned like they were protesting what I was about to discover. Inside, the air felt heavy, still, like the building itself was holding its breath. Elias stood near the far corner, half hidden under the flickering yellow light. The crowbar lay on the ground beside him, and the wooden floorboards had been pried open in a rough square, revealing a dark hollow beneath. "You're here," he said quietly, relief flickering across his face. I stepped closer, my pulse quickening. "What did you find?" Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he crouched down and reached into the hidden space, moving carefully, almost respectfully, as if he was touching something sacred. Then he lifted it out. A rusted blue metal box. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a small toolbox. The paint had faded into a dull, worn blue, chipped along the edges. Rust clung to the corners like time had tried to eat it away, but failed. The latch was stiff, and for a second, I wondered if it had even been opened in years. I stared at it, my chest tightening. "This was buried under a false layer," Elias said softly. "Not just hidden, built into the floor. Someone didn't want it found." My fingers trembled as I took the box from him. It was heavier than I expected, not because of what was inside, but because of what it meant. "Did you tell anyone?" I asked quickly. He shook his head. "No, I didn't leave. I called you first." "Good." I didn't say it out loud, but relief washed through me like warmth in freezing air. I set the box on the workbench and stared at it for a long moment. My thoughts were spinning: my father's missing will, Kendra's relentless pressure to sell, Todd's threat to burn everything down. This wasn't random. This was connected. Slowly, I reached for the latch. My hands felt numb, like my body already knew something I didn't. The metal groaned as I forced it open, and for a split second, I held my breath. I expected something obvious: money, jewelry, something that would explain everything in a clean, simple way. But what I found inside was far worse. There was no cash, no valuables, just a laminated business card and a small, torn piece of paper. I picked up the card first. The name was embossed in gold lettering, still intact despite the years. Mr. Henderson, attorney at law. The name meant nothing to me, but something about it felt important. Then I reached for the paper. The moment I saw the handwriting, my stomach dropped. It was my father's. Jagged, uneven, unmistakable. I unfolded it slowly, my fingers shaking as I read the words. "Tabitha, take this to him immediately. And do not trust your sister." For a moment, the world went completely silent. Not just quiet, empty, like all the sound had been pulled out of the air. I stared at the message, reading it again and again, hoping the words would change, that I had misunderstood something. But they didn't. My father had been afraid. Afraid enough to hide this message under the floor. Afraid enough to leave a warning instead of an explanation. And the warning wasn't about a stranger. It was about my own sister. My knees felt weak, and I reached out to steady myself against the workbench. A wave of nausea hit me so suddenly I had to close my eyes. This didn't make sense. Kendra was difficult, cold, greedy even. But dangerous? I didn't want to believe that. Elias stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Miss Tabitha, your father knew something." I looked at him, my throat tight. He told me not to trust her. Elias nodded slowly. Then we listened to him. It sounded so simple when he said it like that. But nothing about this felt simple. I looked back at the card in my hand. Mr. Henderson. An attorney my father had never mentioned. Why would he trust a stranger with something important enough to hide? Unless he knew he couldn't trust anyone else. "I have to call him," I said, more to myself than to Elias. My fingers fumbled as I pulled out my phone. I hesitated for just a second before dialing the number printed on the card. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered, deep, calm, controlled. "Henderson Law." I swallowed, my heart racing. "My name is Tabitha Miller. My father, Arthur Miller. I think he knew you." There was a pause. It was brief, but it carried weight like a door unlocking somewhere far away. "Yes," the man said, his tone shifting instantly. "Tabitha, I've been expecting your call." A chill ran down my spine. You have?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "Your father left instructions. And documents. I've been holding them until the right moment." My grip tightened around the phone. "The will?" "Among other things," he said. "Listen carefully. You need to come to my office as soon as possible. Tomorrow morning, early." I glanced at Elias, who was watching me closely. "Why the urgency?" I asked. "Because time matters," Mr. Henderson said. "And because your father believed there were people who might try to interfere. People, not problems. Not delays. People." My chest tightened. "You mean, my sister?" There was another pause. "I mean," he said carefully, "that your father did not trust everyone in his immediate circle." That was enough. "I'll be there," I said firmly. "Good," he replied. "And Tabitha, do not let anyone know about this meeting. Not yet." The call ended, leaving a heavy silence behind. I lowered the phone slowly, my thoughts racing faster than I could control them. "He was waiting for you," Elias said quietly. I nodded. "He has the real documents. The will, maybe more." "And your sister doesn't know," Elias added. "No," I said, my voice hardening. "And she can't find out." Because now, everything made sense in a way that terrified me. Kendra's urgency, her insistence on selling immediately, Todd's aggression, the missing will. They weren't just impatient. They were racing against something. Against this. Against the truth my father had hidden. I looked down at the empty blue box, then back at the open floor. "We have to put it back," I said suddenly. Elias frowned slightly. "Put it back? If they come here, and they will, they can't know we found anything." My voice steadied as the plan formed in my mind. "The box stays hidden, the evidence leaves with me." Elias nodded slowly. "That makes sense." We worked together in silence, placing the box back into the hidden compartment, lowering the boards carefully, scattering dust and debris until the floor looked untouched. Every movement felt deliberate, like we were stepping into a game neither of us had agreed to play. But we didn't have a choice anymore. When we finished, I slipped the card and the note into my pocket, pressing them flat against my chest like they might disappear if I didn't hold them close. "I'll leave at dawn," I said, "before anyone shows up." Elias looked at me, something unreadable in his eyes. "And me?" The question hit harder than I expected, because I suddenly realized what I was asking him to do. Stay. Alone, in a place that had just become a target. You don't have to stay, I said quickly. If you feel unsafe, I'll stay, he said quietly, cutting me off. I hesitated. Elias? He gave a small, steady nod. Someone should be here. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him it wasn't worth it. But the truth was, I didn't want to face this alone. So instead, I reached into my pocket and tightened my grip around the note my father had left me. For the first time since he died, I felt like he was still guiding me, not through memories, but through warnings. And as the wind howled outside and the garage settled into silence again, I realized something that made my chest tighten with quiet fear. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about truth. And the moment that truth came into the light, everything in my life was going to change. Before the sun even had a chance to rise, the sky over Billings turned a dull, bruised gray, the kind of color that makes you feel like something bad is already in motion, even if you can't see it yet. I sat in my car with the engine running, hands hovering near the vents, trying to warm the cold out of my fingers, while my mind raced through everything that had changed in just one night. A hidden box. A warning from my father. A lawyer who had been waiting for my call. And one sentence that wouldn't stop echoing in my head. Do not trust your sister. I stared at my phone for a long moment before dialing Kendra's number. It rang twice before she picked up, her voice sharp and impatient, like always. What is it, Tabitha? I'm busy. I closed my eyes briefly, forcing my voice into something softer, something tired, defeated. I can't do this anymore, I said quietly. The fighting, the stress. I need a break. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough for her suspicion to flicker. A break? She repeated. From what? From all of it, I replied. From the house, the estate, everything. I'm thinking of going to a cabin for a few days, just to clear my head. Silence. Then I heard that subtle shift in her breathing, the quiet satisfaction she couldn't quite hide. So, you're finally coming to your senses, Kendra said, her tone smoothing out like polished glass. I told you. Holding on to that place is pointless. I swallowed, forcing myself to stay in character. When I get back, I'll sign whatever paperwork you need. We can sell. The words tasted like betrayal, even though they were part of a plan. Another pause, shorter this time. Well, she said, almost pleased. I'm glad you're being reasonable for once. I ended the call before she could say anything else. The moment the line went dead, my grip tightened on the phone, my chest rising and falling too fast. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was something deeper. A realization. She hadn't even asked if I was okay. She hadn't questioned why I suddenly gave in. She just accepted it, like she had been waiting for me to break. I stepped out of the car and walked back toward the garage, the cold air biting harder now. The sky felt heavier, like a storm was building beneath the surface. Inside, Elias was already awake, sitting on a crate near the workbench, his posture alert even in stillness. He looked up as I entered, reading my expression before I even spoke. She believes me, I said quietly. Elias nodded once. That makes her predictable. I hesitated, then reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small device. It wasn't anything extreme, just a compact, motion-activated security camera I'd picked up the night before from a local store. Simple, legal, but powerful enough to capture what we needed if things went wrong. This is our insurance, I said, placing it in his hand. Elias studied it carefully. You think they'll come? I don't think, I said, meeting his eyes. I know. Because Todd's threat hadn't sounded like a drunken outburst anymore. It sounded like a plan. We moved toward the back of the garage, scanning for the right place. The shelves were cluttered with old oil cans, rusted tools, and spare parts perfect cover if we were careful. I pointed to a narrow gap between two stacked tins. There, I said. It'll give us a clear view of the entrance and most of the floor. Elias adjusted the angle with steady hands, making sure the lens was almost invisible. Then he tested the motion activation. A small light blinked once, then disappeared. It's ready, he said. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. If anything happens, you leave. Don't try to stop them. Don't try to be a hero. Elias didn't respond right away. His eyes drifted briefly around the garage, the beams, the tools, the truck he had brought back to life. "I understand," he said finally. But there was something in his tone that made me uneasy. Not defiance, just quiet resolve. I nodded anyway, because I didn't have time to argue. "Not anymore." "I'll go now," I said. "I need to get to the city before the roads get worse." He gave a small nod. "Be careful, Miss Tabitha." "You too," I replied. As I stepped out of the garage, I felt that pull in my chest again. The same feeling I had the night before. Like I was leaving something behind that might not be there when I came back. I forced myself to keep walking. The drive out of Billings was tense. The roads were slick, the wind pushing hard against the car, but none of it compared to the storm building in my thoughts. Every mile I put between myself and the garage felt wrong. I checked my rearview mirror more than I needed to. And that's when I saw it. Kendra's SUV pulling up to the property. Right behind me. Not minutes later, seconds. And just as she stopped, Todd's truck rolled in right after her. They didn't hesitate. They didn't wait. They stepped onto the property like they already owned it. My grip tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They couldn't even wait for me to leave, I whispered to myself. A part of me wanted to turn the car around, to go back, to stand between them and whatever they were planning. But another part of me, the part that remembered my father's note, knew I couldn't. Not yet. If I went back without proof, without legal ground, I'd lose everything. So I drove on. By the time I reached the neighboring city, the sky had darkened further, and the cold seemed to follow me inside the buildings. Mr. Henderson's office was exactly how I imagined it, simple, orderly, and quiet in a way that made every word feel important. When he opened the door, he didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Tabitha," he said, stepping aside. "Come in." His presence was calm, but there was urgency beneath it. We sat across from each other, and he pulled out a sealed envelope from a locked drawer. The motion alone told me everything. This wasn't something casual. "These," he said, placing it on the desk, "are what your father trusted me to keep." My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. At the top was a document I had been searching for since the day my father died. The will. The real one. I scanned it quickly, my breath catching as I reached the most important line. The house. The garage. Everything. Left to me. Solely. I leaned back slightly, my mind spinning. He didn't leave anything to Kendra?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Mr. Henderson's expression hardened. "Your father had reasons," he said carefully. "He believed there had been financial misconduct." My stomach dropped. "He thought she was taking money from him," he continued. "And he feared she would attempt to manipulate the estate after his passing." Everything clicked into place, so suddenly, it almost hurt. The missing will, the pressure to sell, the urgency. "She's been trying to rush me," I said. "Constantly. She wants everything sold immediately." Mr. Henderson nodded. That would make sense. He pulled out another set of documents, bank statements, records, details that painted a picture I didn't want to see, but couldn't ignore. Before I could fully process it, my phone buzzed sharply in my hand. A notification. Motion detected. My heart skipped. I opened the app immediately. The garage appeared on the screen, grainy, dim, but clear enough. And then, movement. The door opened. Kendra walked in first, her voice carrying faintly through the audio. "She finally gave in," she said, almost laughing. "I told you she would." Todd followed, his tone low and amused. "Good. This place is a waste anyway." I leaned forward, my entire body tensing. They walked through the garage, pointing, talking like they were already planning its destruction. "Bulldoze it," Kendra said. "We can turn this into something profitable." Todd chuckled. "And the old man?" There was a pause. Then Kendra's voice dropped quieter, colder. "We'll deal with him." My blood ran cold. I looked up at Mr. Henderson, panic rising fast. "They're there, right now." He didn't hesitate. "Call the sheriff." I fumbled with my phone, dialing as quickly as I could, my voice shaking as I explained the situation. The dispatcher assured me they would send someone, but it didn't feel fast enough. Nothing felt fast enough. I stared at the screen as the two of them moved deeper into the garage, their voices lowering, their intentions becoming clearer with every second. And in the back of the frame, barely visible in the shadows, Elias stood perfectly still, watching, waiting. The camera blinked once, silently recording everything. And for the first time, I realized something that made my chest tighten with fear. This wasn't just a conflict anymore. It was a countdown. 2 nights later, the temperature in Billings dropped so low, it felt like the world itself had gone silent. The kind of cold that presses in on you, heavy and suffocating, where even the wind sounds distant, like it's afraid to move. I was still in the neighboring city, sitting alone in a dim hotel room with my phone clutched in my hand, refreshing the camera feed more times than I could count. Nothing. No movement, no sound, just the still image of the garage, frozen in time. And somehow, that was worse. Because silence like that doesn't mean safety. It means something is waiting. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Todd's face again, his grin when he made that threat, the way his voice dropped when he said he'd burn the place down. It didn't feel like an empty warning anymore. It felt like something unfinished. At exactly 12:17 a.m., my phone buzzed sharply in my hand. Motion detected. My heart jumped into my throat so fast it almost hurt. I opened the app immediately, my fingers trembling as the screen flickered to life. At first, it was just darkness. Then, the garage door creaked open. A thin line of moonlight cut across the floor, stretching slowly as the door moved wider. And then I saw him. Todd. He stepped inside like a man who didn't expect to be stopped. His shoulders were tense, his movements deliberate, and in his right hand, a red gasoline canister. My breath caught. "No," I whispered, shaking my head as if that could change what I was seeing. He moved quickly, splashing the liquid across the driest parts of the wooden structure, the workbenches, the stacks of old lumber, the corners where dust had settled thick over the years. The smell wasn't something I could physically sense through the screen, but I knew it. Gasoline. It spread like a promise. In the back of the garage, Elias stirred. He sat up slowly on the small cot I had given him, his body stiff as if something instinctive had woken him. Then he sniffed the air and froze. Even through the grainy footage, I could see the exact moment he understood. His head turned slightly toward the main floor. His posture shifted not into panic, but into awareness. He glanced toward the shelf where the camera was hidden, just for a second, just enough to confirm it was still there, still recording. Then, his attention snapped back to Todd. Todd reached into his pocket, pulled out a lighter. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. "Stop," I whispered helplessly. "Please just stop." The lighter clicked. Once. Twice. On the third flick, a small flame appeared, and in the next instant, everything changed. The fumes caught. The fire didn't start slowly. It exploded. A wall of orange surged upward with a roar that shook the camera's image. Flames raced along the gasoline trails like they had been waiting for permission. The wooden beams crackled instantly, the air filling with thick black smoke. Todd stepped back, his face illuminated by the firelight. And then, he laughed. Not nervous, not uncertain, satisfied. "Burn it," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar. "Burn it all." The sound sent a chill through me deeper than the cold ever could. But Elias didn't hesitate. He burst out from the storage area, already gripping the industrial fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. He pulled the pin with practiced speed, stepping directly into the growing heat. The white foam shot out in a thick cloud, hissing as it hit the base of the flames. For a moment, just a moment, it seemed like it might be enough. Like he might actually stop it. Hope flickered in my chest. Then Todd saw him. The laughter vanished. Rage took its place. "You!" Todd roared, his voice sharp and violent as he charged forward. Elias tried to move, but the floor was slick foam, dust, gasoline. His footing slipped just enough. And that was all Todd needed. He slammed into Elias with brutal force. The impact threw Elias backward, his body crashing into the edge of a heavy steel workbench. The sound dull, sharp, final made my stomach twist. Elias collapsed. For a split second, he didn't move. Get up, I whispered, my voice breaking. Please get up. The fire was spreading faster now, crawling up the walls, licking toward the ceiling. Smoke thickened, turning the air into something suffocating. Then movement. Elias's hand twitched. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up just enough to shift his weight. Blood was already visible along the side of his head, dark against his skin. But instead of running, he reached. Not toward the door, not toward safety, toward the shelf, toward the camera. My breath caught as his fingers stretched out, trembling, as if the only thing keeping him conscious was the need to protect that one piece of truth. Todd stood over him, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling with adrenaline. For a moment, it looked like he was going to strike again. Then, sirens. Faint at first. Then louder. Todd's head snapped up. Panic replaced rage in an instant. He looked around wildly, the fire reflecting in his eyes, calculating. Cowardice won. He turned and ran. Out the side door, into the darkness. Leaving Elias behind. Alone. In a burning garage. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold my phone. I dialed emergency services again, my voice frantic as I tried to explain, to beg them to hurry, to tell them someone was still inside. But I wasn't there. I was miles away. And all I could do was watch. The footage blurred as smoke filled the space, the camera struggling to capture anything through the chaos. The flames roared louder, devouring everything they touched. Then, the screen froze and went black. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark screen, unable to move, unable to breathe properly. Then the reality hit. I grabbed my keys. I booked the first available flight. I didn't pack, I didn't think. I just moved. The airport felt unreal, too bright, too normal, filled with people who had no idea that somewhere, a man might be dying because I asked him to stay. The flight was the longest few hours of my life. When we landed, I ran. Straight out of the airport, into the first taxi I could find, my voice shaking as I gave the driver the address of the county hospital. Please, I said, as fast as you can. The hospital doors slid open with a soft hiss, and I rushed inside, my heart pounding against my ribs. The sterile smell hit me immediately, sharp and clean and wrong. I found the front desk, barely able to get the words out. Garage fire. Last night, an older man. Elias, please. The nurse checked quickly, then pointed down the hallway. He's alive, she said. Alive. The word hit me like air after drowning. I ran. When I reached the room, I stopped just inside the doorway. Elias was sitting up in the hospital bed, bandaged, bruised, a heavy wrap around his head. His skin looked pale against the white sheets, but his eyes were open. He was alive. My knees almost gave out. I stepped closer slowly, tears blurring my vision. Elias, he looked at me, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. You came back, he said softly. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then I noticed his hands, burned, covered in soot, and still, clutching something. The camera, the plastic casing was scorched, edges blackened from the heat, but it was intact. You kept it, I whispered. Elias's fingers tightened slightly around it. It matters, he said. What happened? It matters. Tears slipped down my face before I could stop them. Yes, I said quietly. It does. Because in that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't just about proving Todd guilty. It wasn't just about the fire. It was about everything my father had tried to protect, the truth. And now, we finally had it. The police station felt colder than the winter outside, not because of the temperature, but because of what I was about to do. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow, as if the truth couldn't survive anywhere softer. I walked down the hallway with the scorched camera in my hand, my grip tight enough to hurt. Mr. Henderson was beside me, calm, steady, like a man who had walked into rooms like this 100 times before. I, on the other hand, felt like every step was carrying me further away from the life I used to know. Before we even reached the door, I heard her voice. Kendra. Shaky, tearful, convincing. She was trying to help him, she sobbed. I told her not to bring strangers onto the property, but she wouldn't listen. He must have been careless, maybe drunk. I don't know. But the fire, her voice cracked perfectly. It destroyed everything my father built. I stopped just outside the door, my chest tightening. For a moment, just a moment, I almost believed her. That's how good she was. But then I looked down at the camera in my hand, its surface blackened from heat, and I remembered Elias lying on that cold concrete floor, bleeding and still trying to protect the truth. I pushed the door open. The room fell silent. Kendra turned toward me, her expression shifting instantly from grief to shock. Her red-rimmed eyes widened, her lips parting as if she hadn't prepared for this version of events. Tabitha, she said, her voice catching. Oh my God, you're here. I was just telling them. I didn't let her finish. I stepped aside slightly. This is Mr. Henderson, I said calmly. My father's attorney. The effect was immediate. Color drained from her face, like someone had pulled the life right out of her. Her eyes flickered not just with fear, but recognition. She knew that name. Mr. Henderson walked forward without hesitation and placed his briefcase on the metal table with a quiet, deliberate thud. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the kind of weight that signals something is about to end. Sheriff, he said, his voice firm and controlled. I recommend we pause this line of questioning. We are here to present evidence regarding arson, attempted homicide, and financial fraud tied to the estate of Arthur Miller. Kendra let out a short, disbelieving laugh. That's ridiculous. She's lying. This is insane. Mr. Henderson didn't even look at her. He opened his briefcase and removed a document, sliding it across the table toward the sheriff. The original notarized will, he said. The sheriff leaned forward, his expression shifting as he read. I watched his eyes move across the page, watched the moment understanding settled in. Kendra shook her head slowly. No, no, that's not real. I have the will. I showed you. That document, Mr. Henderson interrupted calmly, is a forgery. The word landed like a hammer. Kendra's breath hitched. You can't prove that. Without a word, Mr. Henderson placed a second set of documents on the table: bank records, transaction logs, signatures that didn't match. These records, he continued, show irregular withdrawals and financial activity prior to Mr. Miller's passing. Activity he believed was unauthorized. The sheriff's expression hardened. Kendra's composure began to crack. That's not what this is about, she snapped suddenly, her voice rising. This is about her bringing some unstable stranger into our father's property. He started the fire. Enough, I said quietly. It wasn't loud, but it stopped her. I stepped forward, placing the burned camera on the table between us. You want to talk about the fire? I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. Let's talk about what actually happened. Kendra's eyes flicked to the device. For the first time, real panic flashed across her face. No, she whispered. No, you can't. I connected the camera to the sheriff's computer with a cable Mr. Henderson handed me. My fingers moved slowly, deliberately, like I needed each second to anchor myself. The screen flickered. Then the footage began to play. At first, it was just the dim interior of the garage. Then the door opening. Todd stepping inside, the red gas can visible in his hand. The room went completely still. No one spoke. The video showed everything: the gasoline spreading across the floor, the lighter sparking, the explosion of flames that followed. Todd's face lit by fire, twisted with satisfaction. Then Elias, running toward the flames, fighting them. And then, Todd attacking him. The impact. Elias falling. The sheriff stood up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. That's enough, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Kendra stared at the screen, her face pale, her mouth slightly open. There were no tears now, no performance, just shock. That's not, she started, but the words died before they could form, because there was nothing left to deny. The sheriff turned to his deputies. Locate Todd immediately, he ordered, and take her into custody for questioning related to fraud and potential involvement. The room shifted into motion. Deputies moved forward, and Kendra reacted instinctively, stepping back, her hands raised slightly, as if she could stop what was happening. "No, wait," she said, her voice breaking. "You don't understand, this isn't Tabitha. Say something." Her eyes locked onto mine, desperate now. "Please," she said, her voice cracking completely. "We're sisters. We're family. You can't do this to me." The word family hung in the air, heavy and hollow. For a moment, memories flickered, childhood birthdays, shared rooms, laughter that felt real at the time. But they felt distant, like they belonged to someone else's life. I looked at her, really looked, at the fear in her eyes, at the mask finally gone, and I realized something I had been avoiding for too long. She had made her choices long before I made mine. "I'm not doing this to you," I said quietly. "You did this." Her expression crumpled. She tried to reach for me as the deputies took hold of her arms, but they pulled her back, the cold metal of handcuffs clicking into place with a finality that echoed in the room. "Tabitha!" she cried, her voice rising in panic. "Please, don't leave me like this." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because I finally understood that some lines, once crossed, can't be undone. I turned away. 6 months later, spring arrived in Billings like a quiet promise that life could start again, even after everything had burned. The legal process took time, but the outcome was clear. Todd was convicted for arson and assault. Kendra faced charges for fraud and her role in everything that led up to it. Justice didn't feel loud or dramatic, it felt steady, inevitable. And for the first time in a long time, my life felt like it belonged to me again. The garage, what was left of it, stood as a scar on the property for a while. Blackened beams, warped metal, the smell of smoke that refused to leave. But I didn't tear it down. I rebuilt it. Every dollar that had nearly been stolen from me went back into that space. New wood replaced the burned structure. Reinforced beams stood where old ones had fallen. The doors were stronger now, the interior brighter. But the purpose of the garage changed. It wasn't just my father's sanctuary anymore. It became something bigger. We created a program small at first to teach basic automotive repair skills to people who needed a second chance. People who had been overlooked, dismissed, or pushed aside. People like Elias once was. He recovered fully, though a faint scar remained along his hairline, a quiet reminder of the night everything changed. But when he walked into the rebuilt garage for the first time, wearing a clean uniform with his name stitched over the pocket, he looked different. Not because he had changed, but because he was finally seen. On the day we opened, a small crowd gathered outside. Neighbors, a few former clients, even some people who had heard about what happened. I stood beside Elias as we pulled the cloth away from the new sign. "Dad, Elias Garage." The letters gleamed in the sunlight. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stood there, feeling something warm settle in my chest, something that hadn't been there in a long time. "Peace." I placed my hand on Elias's shoulder, and he gave me a small nod, his eyes steady. And in that moment, I realized something my father had been trying to teach me all along. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who stands with you when everything else falls apart. And sometimes, the person who saves your life isn't the one you grew up with. It's the one who chose not to walk away. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized this story was never just about a garage, an inheritance, or even betrayal. It was about the quiet choices people make when no one is watching, the kind that reveal who they truly are. My sister chose greed, control, and shortcuts, and in the end, those choices consumed everything she tried to take. But Elias, someone the world had overlooked, chose dignity, courage, and loyalty, even when it cost him everything. And maybe that's the real heart of this story. We don't always get to choose what happens to us, but we always choose how we respond, whether we protect what matters or destroy it for something temporary. If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something real, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in my place? And if you enjoy stories like this, stories about truth, justice, and the unexpected people who change our lives, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel, Revenge Tale Network. Your support means more than you think, and it helps me continue telling stories that stay with you long after they end. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next story.